Welcome to The Machine, a computer science education podcast from Waterford Institute of Technology. My name is Rob O'Connor, a lecturer from the Department of Computing and Mathematics at WIT. We have a bonus episode for this academic year. I thought we'd finished up with the last one actually. However, there's always room for one more. This is a recording of a panel discussion I chaired for the ACM SIGCSE Eire annual meeting. Now, there's a lot of acronyms there, so let me explain. The ACM is the Association of Computing Machinery, the largest educational and scientific computing society in the world. They also have many special interest groups, SIGs, on subtopics about computing, programming, data, that kind of stuff. One of these is the Computer Science Education, CSE, but it's pronounced C, which has a specific Irish branch. So, SIGCSE Eire. It's a lot to take in. Anyway, the annual meeting this year took the form of an online panel discussion entitled What Third Level Needs to Know About Second Level Computer Science, as this year saw the first intake of first year college students who'd studied the new Leaving Cert Computer Science subject. Hopefully there'll be more in the future. On the panel, we had Keith Quille of TU Dublin and Becker of UCD, two of the main authors of the Computer Science for Leaving Cert textbook. We also had Siobhan Drohan, a computing lecturer from WIT, who's done a lot of work on coding at second level and indeed primary level, and whose voice will be very familiar to regular listeners of this podcast. The panel discussion took place on Zoom, and towards the end you will hear some other voices who pose questions to the panel. We're going to take a break from the machine for the summer, but we'll return in September with more accessible chats on computer science. So let's get to this episode. I began the panel discussion by asking each of the guests about the kind of stuff that's taught in first year on their respective computer science degrees. Keith Quille from TU Dublin was the first to answer.
Before I even get into what we do in our institution, there's also some really good resources looking at other institutions. And I'm going to later on draw you to some work that Brett did, where he examined loads of sort of first year, more so on like introductory programming courses. But he did a really wide sort of study, which is really interesting if your university is thinking of changing, whether that's for adaptation to Leaving Cert students coming in, or if it's just generally looking at what other institutions are teaching. That's my get out of jail card for my lack of knowledge of everything else in the space. But then I suppose in our institution, we teach very similar sort of what we would class CS1 or Introductory to Programming, or I think we call it in our institution SDEV1, where we teach sort of fundamentals, which is really interesting that they align quite closely with the Leaving Cert course. And I guess there are some of the sort of the snippets that we can take away from today. Our CS1 course is delivered using Python, and we changed that before the Leaving Cert adapted it. So I'm not sure whether that is, if that is that going to be a positive, or is it going to be something they've seen already. Our CS2 course, our second year, is very similar. And then we cover all of the usual introductory items like introduction to databases, introduction to HTML, where I suppose again aligns with some of the Leaving Cert courses for good or for bad. And they're not overly advanced topics in our first year, but I guess it's similar across institutions. But it's a kind of wide enough spectrum to get students introduced. We have a single entry stream where students doing different streams can then sort of choose them. So, for example, some of our IT management or cloud-based, that was one of the reasons we picked Python, was that they might go into scripting or pure software. So they were like local design rather than, we didn't know at the time, sort of Leaving Cert Computer Science. So we have a single stream, and then all the streams sort of diverge, whether you're software or machine learning or those. So that's our
Excellent. Siobhan, we might go to yourself next. The kind of stuff that you do, or we do at first year of computer science.
Perfect. Yeah. And it's very similar to what Keith was saying there as well, in that it does align with the Leaving Cert that we have, the syllabus that's there at the moment. With our first years, what we do is we do Program Fundamentals 1 and 2, and that's Java based on the common one, but different types. And we've other degrees as well, but they can start with JavaScript instead of Java. It depends on what you're looking at really for the skill set that they want at the end. And then we do website development, where you'd have HTML and CSS, and then you'd move into JavaScript on that. And then we have computer systems that Rob would teach. So it's all about the internals of the computer and loads more stuff around that, like awareness of GitHub and, a huge amount of just items around computer systems area stuff. And then we do the maths and then the physics as well. And if you do look at the Leaving Cert curriculum, you do see that there is a significant amount of overlap there as well in the content that's been covered with them. Now, that some of the languages might differ, and some of the, in particular, the tool sets might differ, and the direction might differ in how you do it at first year as opposed to doing it at Leaving Cert level. But there's, all in all, looking on paper at the syllabus, they do look quite similar.
Excellent, Siobhan. Thank you for that. And Brett, we'll go to yourself for the way things are being done in UCD.
So, yeah, I mean, in terms of UCD, it sounds fairly similar to what Keith and Siobhan are saying. I think one of the big changes in maybe the past decade or so is the number of programs and exactly what program you're talking about. If you're talking about computer science or one of the very many computer science-ish, if that makes sense, programs that are out there now. I teach introductory programming for Internet of Things engineers and information engineering engineers. And it's broadly similar, but it gets, the fine details change a little bit. I mean, another thing, just listening to Keith and Siobhan there, is you hear different languages, and that changes, over time, kind of slowly. But I think all in all, what's taught in first year programming hasn't changed all that much in several decades. And there aren't many people, I don't think, that say that it should. I mean, there's nuance and there's fine details, but on a national level, I looked at what's taught in first year programming about 2 years ago and published a paper on that. And like Keith said, I was involved in a couple of worldwide efforts as well. One with Keith, where we looked at one conference in particular as well, the main SIGCSE conference. And we looked at the past 52 years at what's done in first year. And it's interesting. There's trends that you see come and go, but there's no sea changes in terms of first year anyway, I don't think. Another thing that you could look at in terms of the global picture in particular is the ACM and IEEE joint curricula, which are updated about every 10 years. If you Google CS 2013, IEEE ACM, you'll find it. And these are kind of model curricula for universities everywhere. And that's being revamped currently for 2023, I think, we hope. I'm on the steering committee of the group that's looking at that again. So there's different views that you can have on this in terms of national and global and international. But really, if you look at different countries and look at different decades, it doesn't change all that much in first year. I think the further you go up the ladder, it starts to change dramatically. I'll be quiet now, but those papers I referenced are all on my website, brettbecker.com.
Oh, yeah, you'd have to get the old personal plug in there, Brett, wouldn't you?
You can't not.
I'm surprised you didn't do it with jazz hands, But what's interesting about that is, or I suppose what I would hear from that is that there seems to be an agreed set of fundamentals. Okay, some of the nuance might change between places, but there's a kind of an agreed set of, if I want to call it basic skills or core concepts, that all computing students or computing graduates should know or should at least have an awareness of. Now, the depth of those obviously depends on the type of course that you're doing, but what you've all described is broadly similar. And I suspect if we were to talk to somebody from UL or from Sligo or Cork or wherever, they'd probably have a similar answer as well. So we kind of have an agreed set at introductory third level, but now we have this new second level subject. So this year, as in the entry for September of 2020, saw the first cohort of students, first cohort of first year college students who would have taken the Leaving Cert Computer Science subject. Now, because of events, they didn't end up taking the exam and things were cut short and blah, blah, blah. But we did see some of those students appearing in our classrooms in September or October of 2020. Let's just talk about the type of stuff that they are doing at second level. Now, as I alluded to in my introduction, Keith and Brett are very knowledgeable on this area because they literally wrote the book on it. Siobhan and I and others have been engaged with second level computing activities for a number of years. I'm intrigued to know formally what they're doing. I know I've seen the high level views and the high level topics, but maybe down to the nitty gritty of the type of tools that they're using, the type of languages that they're engaging with, because that allows us then to maybe tailor what we're doing in third level or not. So maybe, Keith, we might go back to yourself first, if that was okay, just to think about what tools and languages are students on second level computer science using?
Okay, this is really exciting because there's two levels to this, I think. And please feel free to pull these apart any way you wish. So the first level is like the most basic tools in language, and they're somewhat prescribed, and they'll change a little bit over time, the tools, I guess, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the languages are very well described. They're Python and JavaScript. I believe you can use additional languages for ALTs, which are what they call the applied learning tasks, or the tasks that students would do throughout the year. But generally, the exam and assessment is in Python and then JavaScript. I mean, that changes a little bit because this year with COVID, they mentioned that in the state exams that they won't cover JavaScript to make the sort of exams more given the COVID restrictions. So they're the most common languages, or the prescribed languages. The tools are also prescribed to teach Python, but they're more for assessment purposes. So you can use whatever tool you wish, or IDE or development environment you wish. But the two most common the schools are using is one called IDLE, which is shipped with Python, or Thonny. And this is really interesting why they use this, or I mean, not even why, because I mean, they're prescribed at the minute by the State Exams Commission. But why schools like them are really unusual things that we wouldn't consider at third level, such as with Thonny, it comes with its own Python environment, so you can add your own modules. What I mean by that is that their administrators in secondary schools may not allow teachers have full access to installing environments and stuff. So really unusual little quirks of the Leaving Cert has come out. But that's the most common two tools. And for the State Exams Commission, they generally release a circular letter. You can see all these on the State Exams Commission's website. And they'll prescribe IDs for fairness and I'm sure many other reasons. And again, IDLE and Thonny have come up there. And of course, some of the rationale is things like IntelliSense or linting or refactoring of programming. What that means is that some of the smart IDEs can rewrite some of your code to look a little bit nicer, I guess. So there are some of the sort of very high level stuff that you can find anywhere on sort of the sites. But something really interesting that has caught my attention this year, we visit loads of schools, and it's a question that comes up everywhere between the SIGCSE community of practice for Leaving Cert or interested teachers and schools we go to, is Python has a lot of modules. And this is just something, I guess, to highlight as a really exciting, yet nobody knows really the answer to this, is sort of what modules would you use? So, for example, there's an applied learning task called data analytics. Do you use some of the more advanced modules? Do you do it with more sort of fundamental code? And this is a really exciting conversation happening at Leaving Cert at the minute. So to name some languages, if you're handling data, do you use pandas or you just use, regular lists? And these are really exciting. And I'm sorry, I snuck that into the tools and languages because I think it's a super exciting conversation. And it'll sort of shake some fundamentalists to the core. And it'll also then, should we or shouldn't we? It's a great debate at the minute. And so what you might see coming into third level is students who are very proficient with things like pandas or TensorFlow, with many libraries or not. And it's going to be it's a really interesting topic going forward, which I'd love to see a discussion. I'm going to stop talking in a second soon on. It's more, there's like I said, there's two levels. There's the tools and the languages, and then, what do we use on top of that? And I think it's a super exciting time.
And would I be just a quick kind of question that you can give a short answer to is, would that depend when you're talking about those extra modules or those libraries that or tools that they might be using, is that largely down to an individual teacher as opposed to something that is prescribed in the curricula?
They're not prescribed anywhere. I mean, as in there's no prescription in the in the final exam. They say that you're only allowed to use local libraries. I'm more talking about the coursework and the applied learning tasks throughout the year. So the exams are very, very well defined, which is really amazing when you're going to sit it because you know what you're sort of in for in a sense. But it's the exciting stuff is that you now have students who are proficient in stuff that in some universities we teach in fourth year. And they're writing some of this code to whatever depth or extent, I'm still unsure, but they're writing some of this really advanced stuff early on because Python maybe allows for that. And it's I don't think it's a problem. It's a great discussion, just like first year computer programming of, where does it belong or not. And I think it's a fantastic way for some students to showcase their coursework. There's no restrictions on that, if that makes sense, if that's what you're asking. But it could be student-led, where you have students who've done coder dojos or loads of prior experience, or teacher-led. Every school is different, which is also very exciting.
Okay, so actually that brings me to a kind of an interesting point, and this is something I don't know, so I'm asking you on my behalf as well as on the audience's behalf. Brett, what is what's the breakdown of work in the Leaving Cert subject? So how much of it is exam and how much of it is project or continuous assessment based?
So
maybe you don't know that now, so it might be unfair to ask you.
No, it's fine. The Leaving Cert itself is 70% traditional exam, traditional Leaving Cert exam, and 30% is for a project, essentially. What Keith mentioned, I think earlier, ALT. So that the students do 4 ALTs over the course of their studies. And then the fifth ALT, as it is the remaining 30%. That's graded by the...
Could I just stop you there for a second? And could you just describe what the ALT is again?
Keith is probably better poised to ask because he works with them every day. So Keith...
even what the acronym stands for. Is it...
Applied learning tasks.
Yep.
So sorry for cutting over you.
Okay.
There's 4 of them if it helps. So they're not done in order of these numbers. So it's just, and I only know this because I really enjoy working with. We do a lot of work with schools. But the first one is an interactive system or web system essentially. ALT2 is your analytics, data analytics essentially. I'm paraphrasing the actual terms if that's okay. The ALT3 is modeling and simulation, so developing models and simulations for multiple scenarios or systems. And then the 4th ALT is embedded systems, which would consist of a microbit or a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino. And they're the 4 tasks they do over the year. And then the coursework, the last 30%, can be a combination of those topics as a final project, essentially.
Okay. And the scope, there's a lot of scope there to go off in any direction they want, really, is there?
They're somewhat defined. So the SEC defines the coursework brief, yeah. And again, if you want to sample examinations.ie, you'll find there's 1 or 2 and then a sample one as well. So there's lots to draw from there. And they're quite well defined in a sense.
Siobhan, I wonder if you have a kind of a comment or any thoughts on what the lads have been saying about the materials used at second level.
Yeah, I had a look through the sample assessments that were up there for the Leaving Cert, and they look really good. Like there's the higher and the ordinary and stuff. But one thing that was and you drew attention to it, Keith, there when you were chatting about the different modules and the different slants that they could take, because that's one thing that actually, for say they're all going to be learning Python, but some of them might come in with a data science slant, some might come in with a business kind of slant, depending on which teacher is teaching the actual Python module. Will they have a different orientation because it's such a versatile language? And how will that affect us as well on third level? Yes, they've done Python, but what orientation have they been teaching and application of that? And have they used it in web-based stuff, or is it desktop work or, command line interface? So that would be one comment that I would have based on what Keith was saying there about the different modules.
Yeah, Keith, would you like to respond to that?
It's a good thing. So I've seen so many different tools. So for example, in ALT1, the general task is to build an interactive website with a database where they can communicate, right? And that's really good. And because Python is the core language, many people would develop that sort of system in Python or in JavaScript or combinations of. But that leaves it open, which is, again, for it's a great discussion for positive or for negative, that they can develop systems with, Firebase or with Django, and there's lots of different things in between there. So, it's something, I'm delighted you asked it. It's something to be cognizant of in third level, that they may not all come in with the same sort of work with the same systems. But the variety there is super positive and encouraging when you see so many different approaches to them. So I don't know if it's going to be a positive or negative, but it will certainly impact us. You can't assume that all students will use Firebase or something else as well. So yeah, they can use a lot of different things. I've seen so many different approaches to these projects, which is really encouraging.
Again, Keith, just because you seem to have the figures, and again, I'm asking you a question based right. So there's an issue with, we see it in it's a global issue, and it's to do with inclusion and gender diversity in computer science. That the figures are shocking, to be honest with you. And I know it's not localized to Dublin or Waterford or Ireland. It's a global phenomenon, or certainly in my opinion, what I've seen it is anyway. Do you have any idea what the uptake of computer science as a Leaving Cert subject is like amongst female students?
I'm going to be very cautious about saying this because I know one of the writers of the report I'm going to reference is here, and I'm just going to hope I have the right figures from it because I skimmed it again today. So Lero were commissioned to do the research on the Leaving Cert Computer Science, and I believe the figures, and I'm going to just generally look around, I had something open earlier on, so it's around 22%. Depending on the type of school, or so anywhere between 16 and 22%. I'm super open to correction on that, but it is relatively representative of third level institutions, but only in the Western world, I guess, where there are other domains where there's more females than males taking part in computer science as a discipline. So,
oh really? I
I
wasn't aware of that. That's heartening to hear.
Yeah, so for example, in the Middle East and so forth, that typically there's more female participants in computer science than male for whatever reasons, and I'm not by any means an expert in this area, but there are differences, and there's institutions in the States like Harvey Mudd that have done some fantastic work over long term to change numbers and diversity, and as well as not just male and female, but like say geographical inclusion, socioeconomic inclusion. There's lots of other facets as well. So there's some really good research out there in these areas, I guess.
To try to tie a couple of those threads together, what you've talked about with the tools, Python and JavaScript and like IDLE and Tony and all those are all free tools. You don't need a beast of a machine in order to run them. So it's, in terms of accessibility, it's a lot handier than say using Swift, for example, which only runs on Apple devices or whatever else, or using Kotlin and Android, which you need a much more powerful machine in order to run. So I might go to kind of Siobhan and ask for her thoughts on the use of those tools and possibly what that might mean for inclusion, largely focused around gender, but maybe not totally associated with that. Now, actually, I've just noticed that Siobhan has dropped off the call. I think she's having internet trouble. So, I don't know, Keith, I might go back to yourself then, just on that topic. I know you've just kind of answered it, but it just helps to keep the conversation going.
I can only give you experience, right? So we go out and do a lot of work with schools individually. So Leaving Cert Computer Science schools, or even just schools where we're trying to introduce computer science. I'm trying to make sure if Siobhan or Brett jump back in.
I'm back, but I've missed it.
Oh, Siobhan's back in. But we that's okay. I'll finish really quickly what we found, and we have a paper or two on it. That the pedagogies and approaches are almost as important. So when we did our camps, we spent a huge amount of time developing how we would change perceptions and how we would get more people interested in computer science. And in our first year camps, it was like 60% male, 66% male, 33% female. But by our third year, by really working on how we deliver the content, it was actually 65% females taking our camps and like 35% males. And it was open call, so we didn't select any of the schools and stuff. So I think there's definitely lots of layers to this, and it's not an easy answer. But there are things we can learn from other things and international research as well. Sorry, I'm going to hand over to Siobhan.
No, that's okay. So Siobhan, you might have missed the question there. So we were just talking about inclusion and gender diversity and how this might help to rebalance some of the issues that we're experiencing here and in other parts of the world as well. And if you had any thoughts or comments on it based on what you've heard so far.
Well, I suppose it's definitely something that we need to look at. And I'd be very interested, Keith, in looking at how you changed your delivery in order to increase the numbers. Like, that's something that is definitely publishable, or if it's not published already, it's something that I'd be definitely interested in looking at, because I think we need to all just have communities where we learn off each other and how to fix this issue. It is a big issue.
Just for any institution here, that work has just finished, and it was with 9,900 students over 3 years. and it's published, but we're going to give it away. So now that we're finished with it, we're going to give away the CAMP model. So if any institution visits schools already, we're happy to share it. So just please reach
Brilliant.
out. Yeah.
We might talk about moving forward, about what this might mean for the next few years of third level computing education based around this. Siobhan, I want to ask you briefly about, because you have experience this year with, we have a couple of students who we know have done Leaving Cert Computer Science in our first year class, and just how you found those individuals. Now look, I know it's an individual, it can't be generalized, but just how you found them and the way that they interacted with the material that in your classes this year.
Yep, very good. Well, I teach through Java. I had the students through Java, and they would have done Python and JavaScript before, so they would have still been learning new material. But what I found was that their speed for onboarding with the new language Java was absolutely phenomenal. Like, they were you just teach them the new syntax and they were gone. They were off, and they performed incredibly well. And really ideal students would be great. They were really good. Like, yeah, it was painless like that. And it's definitely something that but regardless of whether somebody has done the Leaving Cert or not, you'll always have those types of students that will come in anyway, that will be really fast for picking it up. Maybe they've done Coder Dojo before, or maybe they've just have a natural ability for it. So you're always going to have, I always find whenever I teach introductory programming modules, I always have a wide variety of abilities. But there's definitely I'm sensing that we're going to have a lot more of the students coming in having done the Leaving Cert, and that there might be a tipping point where we need to really look at with that, where we might have more students that are quicker at kind of developing stuff and keeping them busy.
But there's a kind of a chicken and an egg situation here, though, because are they choosing computer science at Leaving Cert because they're already into it, and therefore they're already on that track? Or is the Leaving Cert subject potentially turning them on to a third level choice and career options beyond that? I spoke with Brett off a while ago, and he made an interesting comment that has kind of stuck with me for quite some time. And I think Brett is back on now. So Brett, I'm going to go to you for a comment on this. Brett said his hope for Leaving Cert Computer Science was that it wouldn't just be for students who go on to study computing. It would be for students who go on to study business or some health topic or whatever. It doesn't matter. Brett, have you got a kind of a thought or a comment that you'd like to describe about that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that the reason I said that is because computing is needed more and more in not just daily life, but in jobs. Every industry, every walk of life, you need computing skills. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think you'd find many lawyers today who would say that knowing more about computers would make you a worse lawyer. And it's the same for doctors and everybody else. There's math, there's reading, there's writing, and these days there's computing. And I think that it's a great skill for anybody to have, regardless of what their interest is or what they're going to do at third level. And I mean, when I said that about second level, I'll say it now about third level. I hope that most of the students that I have in my computer science classes are going to go on to be musicians or artists or doctors or lawyers or whatever. If they want to be computer scientists too, great. But I hope that we see more and more courses that are tailored for those people that want to do computer science but don't necessarily want to be a software engineer at Google, which is where a lot of people think all computer science majors want to go. And that's just simply not true.
So this is coming around to this kind of idea of coding for all, or like if you think of, in Ireland, we tend to have more programs that are discipline specific as opposed to a more liberal arts type program that you might have like in America. I know, like where the likes of you studied originally, Brett. And I have spoken to people about it before, about kind of like a basic computing module. I don't mean kind of working with Microsoft Word or that type of stuff, but if you wanted to call it a kind of a computing literacy module, Is that what you're kind of getting at with what you're describing there? Or am I picking you up incorrectly?
No, it would be one way of achieving that. I mean, I think that we don't know how best to achieve it yet, and it'll probably depend on what type of student we're talking about as well. And computing has a lot of advantages, but it also has some, we could say, disadvantages compared to other skills or other disciplines. And one of those things, probably an advantage and a disadvantage, is that it's moving so fast. So, we all agree that students in second level and even prior to second level need to learn how to read and learn how to write and learn how to do math, right? But are any of those things accelerating faster than we're teaching? No, at least not at that level. But not even generation, right? Generation is too big a word. Every year, the students coming in to you pick a year, fourth year, they have a different computing experience and a different computing knowledge than the students that were just 1 year ahead of them. So because technology is moving so fast, how we teach it to who is constantly a moving target. And it would be my opinion that we're still not that great at doing it for the students that we're looking at today, because things are moving so fast.
But if we go back to the start of this conversation, we were talking about an agreed set or a certain set of fundamentals that seems to have hung around for quite some time. Okay, so some of the specifics is changing later on, and some of the technologies and the tools might update. But the actual basics have, I won't say stayed static, but stable might be a better word or a better way of describing it. To move the conversation on towards the end, what do we need to do at third level based around the second level computer science course? Do we need to do anything? How do we need to change? How do we need to adapt? Keith, might go back to yourself with this first.
Okay, that's a really big question. I get the hard one.
It is. It's an unfair question because it's as broad as anything. But it allows you plenty of scope to go off down any rabbit hole you might choose.
Sure. Okay, let's pick one. So I guess two things are going to happen, right? I mean, the computer science is coming into more formally into Leaving Certificate. It's been around in junior cycle for a few years, and in the next couple of years, there's talk of revisions for the primary school curricula. So you're going to see it pop up more and more. And I guess the first lesson is we should probably ask secondary school Leaving Cert teachers to talk to junior cycle short course teachers. We should get junior cycle short course teachers to talk to the up and coming primary school teachers. And us at third level should definitely be communicating with secondary schools to see what they're doing. And not that we're going to change our course, but we're going to have things like differentiation. And sorry, I was a secondary school teacher, so this is a huge part of it. So when you're going to get super strong students and super weak students, how do you balance that? So the super weak student doesn't say, I'm way out of my depth, I can't do computer science, even though we expect no prior work. Or how you get the super strong student not to get really bored and say, I don't want to be here, this is too easy, I'm gone. And these are going to be a really big question for third level because we can't really fundamentally change it. And then I suppose as we move along, Brett mentioned things change so fast. And it's us as a community that should decide what's there. So one of the conversations we had earlier on is what modules do we use, right? That was just I'm paraphrasing. What modules could we use to solve problems? And I guess then the question is, where do we solve them? Do we want to leave that later or earlier in the spectrum? So where do you want skills to become? Because you don't want to use all the super tools and then do data structures and algorithms in first year computer science, and every student will struggle hugely with it again. So I think other subjects have this so well sorted. I mean, if you take chemistry, I'm sorry, I use this random one because I heard it from a keynote years ago. In chemistry, they know how to teach the atom super well. They can tell you what year they show the Bohr's model, what year they show different SPDF layers. And then in third level, stuff I don't know anything about because I was terrible at chemistry in third level, but they have this figured out, and maths is the same. And I guess in computer science, we're only getting to that point where we now have a full spectrum of students. So I guess the two takeaways for me would be listen to what's happening and changing across levels prior to coming in, and then have really deep discussions about what you want your students to have at what different levels and years within your 4-year degree or whatever it is, because things will change a lot. And maybe students will have done all of data structure and algorithms before they get to you. And there's stuff that we have to pay attention to, I guess. So we're figuring it out. But at the same time, some considerations going. And I'm going to stop talking now because I don't really have an answer to it. So it's now becoming waffle. But you get the picture, I guess.
But I think it's that there is no answer. There's just a discussion, and there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. But it's just food for thought at the moment because we're in such an early area, or an early stage of it. Siobhan, I might go to yourself now with that as well. Just what changes or what way do you think we need to adapt at third level to this?
I suppose the first time when I started thinking about, well, we're going to be getting these students coming into us in first year, one of the first things I did was started looking at kind of the science programs and the accountancy programs. Subjects are like where they're long established kind of Leaving Cert subjects, and what do they kind of do? And I was talking to a couple of different people, and some of them were saying, well, the first 6 weeks, the students are kind of bored until they've finished covering all of the material that they needed, the material that they covered originally for the Leaving Cert. And then we started moving into deeper, more targeted material. They were saying, there was definitely boredom coming in. I was having a look as well at other kind of colleges as well, and just looking at different courses like physics and physics and chemistry. And when I was looking at each one of those, a good few of the science courses have listed, it's not a requirement for you to have done physics or chemistry or anything like that. And this across multiple different colleges. But there's a recommendation. It's like, you'd be served well if you did either physics or chemistry or whatever coming into our courses. So maybe that's something that, we kind of recommend, but we don't require it. And then, kind of maybe start looking at, well, if we're going to recommend that and we're expecting most students coming in with this, how will we cater for the ones that don't have it? So there's a huge amount of different, I suppose, strategies to look at. Are we assuming that nobody is coming in with it and then rocking with that? Or are we going to assume that half are coming in and trying to balance the classroom then in students that are going to excel really fast and ones that aren't? And then are we going to assume that they're all coming in with it? So without knowing what way we're going to deliver, where we're going to pitch it based on them doing the Leaving Cert, I think that we kind of, it might be a hard question to answer as well. And as Keith was saying as well earlier on, there's more and more computing coming into primary school levels. Like we do even computing with junior infants. We do little B-bots with them. And it just teaches them sequence of statements and how they move around a particular maze. A B-bot, it's a little robot with buttons on the top, arrows on it, and you have a start and a go button. And what you do is you just, you tell them, you give them a grid maze and you put the B-bot on it, and they have to move a certain number of spaces forward and a certain number of spaces left. And we're teaching this to basically junior infants and senior infants. So they're getting the sequence of the flow of control from sequence. And then we start moving into teaching loads of other different things like spheros, and Keith mentioned microbits and makey-makeys and Arduinos. But these students are all going to start coming in soon into third level to us. And that's one thing as well that is something that I think we do need to look at in the programming area, is we teach with a tool set, basically, with an editor, and, we kind of teach it like that. Whereas these guys coming in now are so used to using tangible devices that, maybe that's somewhere where we need to really start moving down, where they're connecting to devices and seeing stuff really happening as they're coding, like connecting to a microbit and measuring the amount of moisture in soil. But they're still learning how to code, but it's fun. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. It's not like just let's do a loop that counts to 10 and then we'll modify that to do 100 iterations or whatever. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Brett, to you then, kind of finally with the same kind of comment or question, what do you think we need to do at third level?
Right now, wait.
Okay. Do nothing.
Well, if we look at this, if we back up a little bit and go up to a high altitude and look down at Ireland and computing in Ireland, I mean, what we have now is a defined second level curriculum at Leaving Cert level that's not going to change tomorrow or next year. But it's optional for schools to run it, and it's optional for students to take it. At third level, we have a whole bunch of different programs. Some are more similar, some are more different, but there's no defined curriculum despite what we started out in our first question when we said things haven't changed all that much, we're talking about the very fundamentals, the atoms in chemistry, right? Like, the atoms are still there. Same with computing. The idea of data, the idea of transforming data, data storage, data manipulation, these things don't really change that much. But how they're taught, how they're learned, the tools we use, the sequence that we do things in, that all changes. So even though it looks like Leaving Cert Computer Science in Ireland is maybe having this like homogenizing effect, and it's like, oh, what do we have to do now? How do we have to react to this? If you really look at that high altitude picture, I think this is just another ingredient responding to this being the Leaving Cert Computer Science. It's just another ingredient responding to a societal demand for more people more knowledgeable about computing. Until it's a required subject, there's going to be very little that we can do definitively. Individual programs can respond or not. They can respond in different ways. It might make sense, it might not. But third level as a unit, I don't see there. I mean, we don't even do the same thing together in unison. So it's a very difficult, thing to say. It really depends on who your intake is and what you do in first year.
So the conclusion is there are no conclusions, which I quite like, because it's an open-ended conversation. I think we could be having this again in another 20 years and we still might be none the wiser. Might know a little bit more. We might have some more data. We might have a bit more figures that we can deal with. But we will be. It's an open conversation that will carry on for some time. But I do like the idea of being cognizant of it and being aware that there are some of these students coming in, and hope that they're not either being thrown to the wolves or talked down to. That's kind of what you don't want to happen. And again, we'll only learn over the next couple of years, next 5 years or so. It might be interesting to pick up the conversation in 5 years, maybe when we have cohorts going through and we kind of hopefully have a better handle on it. I'm going to conclude the main panel discussion there and open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions or comments or anything. And what I'll do, if somebody wants to ask a question, feel free to speak. I'll repeat the question just so that we can have it on the podcast. And we can just go to the panel. So if you'd like to direct it to anyone, general comment, whatever, if anyone has any questions or statements. Okay, so the columns question there, just because that wasn't recorded, just to put to the panel, was basically talking about going to educationalists to figure out what are the paths or what way is this being done for those more traditional subjects where there is a kind of a leaving cert or, second level through to third level path that might exist. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that. If Siobhan, Brett or Keith would like to come in, just raise your hand and go for it. Go for it, Brett.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. We're not unique here computing in terms of what we're going through. One thing that is kind of unique about computing is the demand that we have. That's pretty steady. I mean, there have been enrollment, in computing, we call them booms and busts. But if you compare them to other disciplines, it's like the stock market. Long term, it's been going up and up and up and up in terms of demand. So keeping students engaged, not losing students, not turning students off, taking care of the students that we already have is a really important thing that we could do more of. I think there's a lot of focus, especially once you get further from the classroom, so to speak, about more numbers in. Let's go to second level and get them interested. Let's go to primary and get them interested so that they come into the front door. But if we don't look after the students that we have once they're in the front door, they're going to leave. And that's even worse than not getting them in the first place, because that's the system, the educational system's failing the students, in my view. Sometimes students make a wrong choice, not a wrong choice, but you make a choice and then you go, oops, nope, I didn't mean that. I'm not enjoying this, so I'm leaving. We'll always have that. Every discipline has that. But we want to minimize students. For instance, sense of belonging is a really important thing for any discipline, and computing needs to remind ourselves of that, So, but back to Colin, like, this is education. This has nothing to do with computing, student engagement and pastoral care and all of these other things.
Jimmy McGivney in the comments has put in a question: is there any data yet on students who have taken Leaving Cert Computer Science? Specifically, where have they gone afterwards, CAO choices, etc.? Any idea whether doing the Leaving Cert subject has made them more likely or less to choose that area at third level? So sorry, Ted Parso is coming in here now.
Just on the first question there. No, we have tried. SIGCSE I know have tried. They've tried going to teachers and saying who has gone to third level, but of course, current times, that's very difficult. At the third level computing forum, I've also asked the colleges, and we've got back feedback from maybe 4 or 5 colleges. But again, there, it's not an ideal time. You can't go into the class and say, well, how many of you did this, and put their hands up. So Keith, a colleague of Keith in particular, is Keith Nolan, is working on a survey, which will, we hope, all colleges will use, and we'll encourage all colleges to do this. This should be ready for maybe September anyway, but we're going to, it's at the draft stage at the moment. We're going to circulate this out to the colleges, ask them to come back with not just the Leaving Cert, a few other questions as well, but to be honest, I'm mostly interested in the Leaving Cert aspect. So we'd like to know, as I say, SIGCSE have tried, we have tried, we've got some feedback, but this could be a big help. In terms of the numbers, I think it's going to be quite a while before we really have a significant number, because not too many schools are taking it yet. We hope that will gradually increase, but it is going to be a while before any big percentage is doing that. Keith might like to come in further on this again, or anybody else, sure.
So with the survey, I mean, I guess that's exactly what organisations like the Third Level Computing Forum and SIGCSE Eire is really trying to do, is to tie this together. We all work sort of somewhat independently, but today it's amazing to see so many people there. So the goal of the survey, and we just got the open call for our ethics application, is that if people participate in the survey, we're going to publish all of the data openly. Of course, the student data will be anonymous and so forth, but some of the questions on the survey are like prior experience, parents, guardians, relatives working. So we're trying to look for factors to answer some of those questions, and one or two of the questions are: did you do Leaving Cert Computer Science, and why did you choose this subject or not? So while this survey is being currently sort of draft revisions within the Third Level Computing Forum, the goal is, if you can run it in your institution, it'll be openly published, of course, with the ethical approval if it's sought and granted. But it means that if we keep adding to this every year, we'll have a corpus of data that will help everybody else to sort of unravel or unpack these and make more informed decisions. I guess that's the first one. And as Ted said, if you guesstimate the numbers in schools, if there was 40 schools in phase 1 that come in this year, and each school has an average of 20 students, I'm guessing that because some schools have 2 classes, some schools have 6 students, you're talking 800 students. That'll be probably the same or a little bit more the following year, and then phase 2 comes in. So it could be a couple of years before the numbers who take it are quite large. But I mean, I think it's an opportune time for us to start tracking it from a third level side. And I'm sorry for taking over, Ted. I think it's super important because secondary schools don't have access to this data. We kind of gathered ad hocly yourself, as Brett and Siobhan and I were talking beforehand about rough numbers, and like we're kind of have, we've maybe 8, but if you ask us any details about those students, we probably wouldn't have them to hand. Whereas I think this is a super initiative from the Third Level Computing Forum that we need to echo everywhere at third level institutions to take this, because SIGCSE and second level seem to be struggling to get the data.
Okay, thanks, Keith. That's great. I raised some extra points there. A couple of things I just want to say too is that the numbers of what we could pretty well definitively say is that there are a lot of people who took Leaving Cert Computing last year who do not seem to have gone into computing at third level. They may have gone to third level, and as Brett said, we could have taken any course, and it's bound to be useful to them. The other interesting thing to have forgotten about was that this could be a help in the gender section too. Number one, if we could establish the number of the male-female breakdown of those who did Leaving Cert, and then the breakdown of those who came to third level, it could be very interesting to see what percentage of females did in fact go on. I mean, were there more females than males in terms of the groups who did go to third level computing? I do hope to approach the CAO later in the year. Now is not a good time, obviously, but later in the year, and see if they would be prepared to cooperate with us to some extent in terms of giving us some of the breakdown. But that'll be voluntary, and we'll have to wait really until say late September, October, before they would have any possibility of having the staffing to do that.
That's a great point, Ed, and thank you very much for your contribution there. And just you've referenced SIGCSE, just in case anyone isn't aware. That's the Computers in Education Society of Ireland, and it's cesi.ie. And you can join the mailing list and all of that stuff there for free if you wish. And I see there's very active discussion on the mailing lists, people talking about all sorts of topics. And as well, Brett sent me a message during it to say that SIGCSE Eire has received its 200th member during this conversation, and that award goes to Jimmy McGibney of WIT. So Jimmy, the no prize, it's winging its way to you. So there it is. Frank has put a comment in, Frank Glavin. I think there's always been a knowledge gap with the intake of computer science students for the last 10 to 15 years due to initiatives like Coder Dojo and a wealth of resources for students to learn online themselves. I think we are quite a way off from making any assumptions about this background knowledge of students, especially while CS is an optional subject, and we will always have to teach assuming no knowledge. I teach computer science to first years in NUIG, and there are huge overlaps in what is taught in the Leaving Cert curriculum. Frank, I agree with you 100%. It's great comments. And actually, the Coder Dojo is an interesting one. I'm involved in Coder Dojo myself. I'm sure many people here are involved in Coder Dojo. And I have noticed over the last couple of years, seeing students coming in who would have been kids doing a bit of coding. It's a very interesting development because it is a bit more structured than maybe what somebody might have taught themselves. For example, I would have done a bit of basic programming 100,000 years ago on an old BBC microsystem and an old Atari as well. But that was very unstructured. But it did mean that, say, when I took up computer science, millions of years ago, I did have a little bit of programming knowledge coming in, and I'm sure there's plenty of other people out there who had that as well. I don't know, Frank, if you'd like to speak on that topic, or if anyone else would tend to come in, that's fine.
I suppose really just with my question, I don't think we can start making any changes to how we go about teaching first years just yet, because there's always, from the last few years, I've always seen you'll have students that have a kind of a wealth of experience already, and others that they've kind of at the last minute they've decided to do computer science, and maybe they need to be taught from the ground up. And so I think at least until computer science for the Leaving Cert is more concretely embedded in the Leaving Cert, then we can't make any drastic assumptions and assume they know about like numbering systems, for instance, and kind of ASCII and things like that, that they will now be learning in the Leaving Cert. I'd also be interested to know the stats of those that are doing computer science for the Leaving Cert but aren't actually going on to a computer science type course. That's very interesting as well. I suppose they get a feel for it and they'll realize it's not for them, which is also not a bad thing really, because people go to college and they don't realize that until they're in first year that they don't like programming and they kind of made the wrong choice. Whereas now in Leaving Cert, they get some hands-on experience, and it's really it's a vast curriculum. The amount they kind of cover over the 2 years, I was really shocked to see how much in detail is covered. But yeah, I just coming back to kind of with regards to us making changes in third level, I don't think we can really do anything for a number of years anyway, until we kind of know for sure. And maybe we could have some prerequisites for the course that you have to have studied computer science before you can get into this, or 2 streams where you have and you haven't, and that way you can kind of keep track of those that need to be taught the basics versus those that are already kind of up to speed on a lot of the groundwork.
It's a great point, Frank, and I suppose it's an ongoing discussion, and I suspect we'll be having it for many, many years. There's just a question in from Joyce, a question for Keith. So this is from Joyce Mahan. How have you experienced the use of the command line at Leaving Cert level versus a third level?
Oh wow, these are deep questions, right? I mean, this is a debate about what tools to use where and when. It's like the Atom model, right? I mean, I hear schools using full GitHub repository. I'm like, I think some of them are this close to like using full advanced Azure DevOps at this stage. And then other schools, struggle to install a pip command, which is installing a module in Python. And I guess, it's really hard. There's the bigger question. What do we want students to know where and when? And, that still hasn't, we still haven't settled on that in any way yet, because, do we need them to have GitHub in secondary school? Do we need them to have GitHub in first year and third level? Isn't it this balance all the time of industry and theory and where and when we teach stuff? So what we probably don't want is, exactly repeating what they're learning at second level. But then again, I suppose there's caveats with that. There's warnings. And I'm sorry, I'm jumping slightly back to Frank's conversation, is that this is the first time we ever have formal curricula. And I think there's a huge difference between informal coder dojos and formal curricula. But then saying that, then such a small percentage of students are doing Leaving Cert Computer Science. If you switch your course, or if you said something, we need a prerequisite, will you turn off all of those other students from doing it that were considering it, but their guidance counselor or someone else reads the documentation that says you probably should have computer science before this? I remember in my secondary school days, which I know I look quite young, it was a little bit ago, but the idea behind this was that our guidance counselor said, oh, you probably should have a science subject to do science. It's not entirely the case. And would we be doing more damage than good by saying you need to have done Leaving Cert Computer Science? So there's loads of little, it's not a really clean answer at all along the way. And Joyce, to go back to your question, we see all sorts. Some students struggle with the most basic Python commands like they do in third level. Some students love using, a Linux operating system and running everything from command line. And I guess our balance is we don't want to discourage the students who have this core amazing interest, the original, introvert super nerds who love computer science. We don't want to turn them off. But we also want to make it more inclusive and bring students in. And there's no real answer, because this is I don't think, so we say we can go to science in their subjects. I don't think science has this subject where some students do college level science for the fun of it for 4 years before they get to college. I'm sure it's the case sometimes, but it's not as, I wouldn't say, and I'm only guessing this, it's as prominent as computer science. So we have so many different mixtures. And then also teachers at second level, they're generally out of field teachers. Their confidence is lower. And across all countries who deliver K-12, there's this idea of what we call an actual curriculum and what teachers actually enact. So there's a difference between what we intend them to teach and what actually, so there's so many more variables that is different to other subjects. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be cutting across the point at all, is that, I would be really worried if we said that you need a prerequisite or you should do Leaving Cert. The numbers that we would deter could be detrimental to the area. But at the same time, those students who come in, we don't want them to go, I've done exactly the same stuff verbatim, because I'm sure some of the teachers take some of their stuff from third level as well, and then we lose them because they're not being challenged or something. And it's a really complex question. I'm sorry, I don't have any answers. I'm just highlighting the things that we at third level we should be thinking about, not changing, just at least even having them in the back of our mind.
Yeah, but I'm very conscious of time here now at the moment, and there's a couple of comments there that I'd just like to read out before wrapping up. So Claire McInerney, option for module exemption based on Leaving Cert Computer Science. I think DCU did a portfolio type entry for prior programming experience a few years back. Keith, you want to comment on that quickly?
As far as I'm aware, LYT, I don't know, it was definitely run last year. I'm not sure if it's again, but they have a first year exemption if you do Leaving Cert Computer Science. So it's an accelerated degree into second year. I'm not sure what that does for but I don't hold me to this. It was, but it could be gone. So clearly, yeah, there's definitely different approaches to be had. Whether they're the right or wrong approach, time will tell. But there's definitely it seems to be capacity to do that. Sorry, I only wanted to highlight a case in case institutions are thinking about it.
No, that's okay. Sorry, Claire. Please.
Oh yeah, sorry. Just to come in on the DCU one. I think Ted, you might know about this. They did bring in that portfolio entry, but I think they actually got rid of it after a while. So it was kind of based on your practical experience, and you would get some sort of, I don't know, was it a separate program or was it an accelerated module exemption type thing? But I think they got rid of it at some point. Ted, you might remember that. Okay. Anyway,
but it's definitely something worth considering and being aware of. Colin Dunphy put in a comment as well, compare this approach to art, which again, or music or many other areas, again, is very, very interesting about that kind of portfolio idea. But there's a great comment from Paul, and I'm sorry, I knew Paul's first name, I don't know who he is or where he's from, but he's got a great comment which says teenagers tend to leave Coder Dojo, which is very true. I've noticed that myself. As soon as they hit second level, they're gone. And the reason they're gone is they probably have other things that they're more interested in at that stage in their life. And
it's probably not physics.
Yeah. And I'm also mindful that it is gone 5 o'clock at this point. It's a beautiful evening here in Waterford. I hope it's a beautiful evening where you are. So I'm going to call a kind of a close to this. Ideally, this time next year or thereabouts, we might be able to have a proper SIGCSE Eire meetup, and we'd all be able to, go for a nice cool beverage afterwards and continue the conversation. That would be very, very welcome. And Brett says he will be the first round is on him.
That's right. Thanks for having us, Rob. This is the first SIGCSE Eire meeting that's been hosted by another campus, which we had envisioned, but pandemic had a different plan for us.
Well, touch wood, we'll be able to invite you all down to Waterford perhaps this time next year, and you can enjoy some of the sunny southeast's weather and some of the fine food and drink. You'd all be very, very welcome. As I said, I'm very conscious of time. This will be available as a podcast. I'll edit it together over the next couple of days, and it will be up on the Machine podcast. If you search for it in your podcast platform, whatever your preferred listener is, you'll find it there. And I'd like to thank Brett, I'd like to thank Keith, I'd like to thank Siobhan for being on the panel today. I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions, for their comments and their questions. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I'm very mindful that people are sick of Zoom. I know I am. So to come on to another one voluntarily says that you're perhaps masochistic. Also thank you to Colm for helping out today and for doing all the behind the scenes work. It wouldn't have been possible without you. So we'll close it there. Thanks very much, folks, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. Hope you have an enjoyable summer, enjoyable break, and you don't kill too many brain cells.